Welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. My guest on the show today is Karl. Karl has been on the show before. Last time, I believe, was in 2019, so this is when the podcast was just getting started. And back then he was building a company called Building Footprints USA. And today we'll be discussing his new project, Tyche Insights, which aims to build a community of geospatial storytellers based on open data. So I won't go into too many more details about Tyche Insights. I'll let Karl do that in just a minute. But before we get started, I just want to draw your attention to the QField Partner Program. So QField, your favorite data collection app for fieldwork, has just launched a partner and ambassador program. So if you are offering QField services, this might be something that you're interested in being part of. And if you're just passionate about QField, creating content around QField, and want to be a bigger part of the community, you'll find a link to the partner program in the show notes of this episode, or just search for qfield.org/partner. Hi, Karl. Welcome back to the podcast. Fantastic to have you on the show again. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. You are the president and co-founder of something called Tyche Insights. And today I'm hoping to learn a little bit more about open data, storytelling, and this business you've started. But I think we should start somewhere else. I think we should go back in the past, give the listeners a bit of context. There was a time where you were running a business called Building Footprint USA. Could we start there, please?
Absolutely. And Daniel, first of all, thanks for having me on, and thanks for having me back. You know, I was reflecting that it was October 2019. Mapscaping had just started. It was probably one of your first dozen or so podcasts. And I'm hopefully one of many people that are really excited that you're back podcasting again. So, you know, back in 2019, I was part of a company, Building Footprint USA, that had an idea. The idea was to curate building footprint data, gathering open data, manufacturing building footprint data using LiDAR and high-res ortho imagery, and not just creating the building footprint data, but connecting the building footprint data to attribution like what's going on inside the building. If it's a commercial or residential, what are the demographics of the people inside, or what's going on with the property that the building is on, what's the value, et cetera. And so we had this idea that, I think when we went on Mapscaping, the very first time we were just starting to craft our first products for the United States and Canada, and really figuring out how insurance companies, telecommunications companies, and financial services companies, and all sorts of other companies could get the value from this higher precision data.
I remember talking to you, and I think it was either just after the Microsoft Building Footprint dataset came out and Google was doing something similar. And I remember thinking, I wonder if this is going to impact your business. But now that those data sets are out there in the world, would you start the same business again today? Like, do you think it would be a viable company today, given the fact that we have the Microsoft and Google data sets, and I'm sure some other ones out there in the world?
Yeah, I think if you're starting the company today, there are some amazing intellectual achievements going on between Microsoft Building Footprints. There's a great company, Acopia, that's out in Ontario, Canada. I forget where, Toronto or Windsor. There are companies that are really doing a great job of being able to take kind of that remote sensing and do feature extraction based on what you can find in the imagery or the LiDAR data. To me, the play is really, these days, is connecting that building footprint data to attribution. What are the addresses? What are the sub-addresses? What are the business inside? What is the purpose of a building? That, to me, if you were starting a company, would be sort of the really interesting business problem to solve.
And so I remember that you sold that business to a company called Lightbox. I think you worked there for maybe 3 years. And now if we fast forward to today, tell us a little bit about the business you're starting today.
Yeah, so spent about 3 years at Lightbox. It was great being able to kind of leverage all the things that we had done at Building Footprint USA. But as often happens, you find other interesting challenges that are out there. And right now, to me, one of the most interesting challenges is the world, regardless of what country you're in, what level of government, there's all sorts of public data, some of which is open, most of which is locked up. And how can we as citizens of our respective countries and cities, et cetera, unlock that data and really get value from it, storytell, analyze, share that insight with other citizens, and hopefully impact society and impact the discourse that's happening around policy and how governments spend money, et cetera.
So we'll dive into all of that in just a second. But staying with this idea of open data, you've been working with open data for some time now. You're back again.
Yeah.
You're doing it again. Are we on the right trajectory here? Are we improving in terms of open data? Is it getting more open, more accessible, or have we hit a ceiling? Could you give us what are you seeing out there in the world?
I definitely have my own personal experience working with open data or public data, and then you can also look at other organizations that are sort of monitoring how things are going out there. There's an organization, Open Data Watch, that does a great job of kind of surveying the whole world and ranking countries based on their open data policy. And then there's kind of that boots on the ground view. Me and thousands, tens of thousands of other people are taking public data, sometimes open, sometimes hard-earned, extracted from governments, and creating new value. It could be someone who's taking imagery and creating new value, like creating building footprints, land cover data sets. It could be organizations like the Open Addresses Initiative that are gathering public address information, address points, and parcel centroids and things like that, and accumulating that. So definitely the trajectory is good. You look at the number of open data sites that are available. Certainly Esri has done a lot to champion open data for geospatial to a certain extent, but there's a ton of data that's still locked up, and no country can really pretend that they are doing an A quality or even B quality job of pervasively making public data available.
When you talk about open data, do you have a difference in your mind between open and accessible? This is something I think a lot about. I think sometimes we point at something, yes, it's open, you can do it, but look at all these hoops you have to jump through, or this archaic file system, or yeah.
Yeah, to me, a good starting point is always to say, what should we aspire to as societies? And this is whether you're in New Zealand or the United States or Denmark or whatever. I think what we should aspire to is that local governments and higher levels of government up to national governments really see the value in making information available, to do so at a regular basis, to make data available in ready-to-consume formats, and to periodically update the data to support it, and really to have kind of the organs of the government that are supporting all of this open data, to have them see the value of, hey, if we push the data into the public domain, make it open, then all sorts of good things happen. Good things happen to your gross domestic product of your country. Good things happen for sort of the transparency and accountability associated with your government. Unfortunately, that's aspirational. And so you hit, the things that we see, the things that I see are, it's a real challenge. A lot of local governments or any governments may have ownership issues. Hey, this is my data. Why do you want access to my data? They may put licensing barriers. Hey, you can have this data. However, you can't create commercial work off the data, or any of a number of other issues. You might find open data available, and that's great, but it's 4 years old and essentially useless. So there are many ways that kind of open data breaks down.
Yeah, and I'm sure the listeners will be aware of a lot of these problems as well that you're talking about. So getting back to your new venture here, talk a little bit about open data. You're working with it again. When we talked about value creation opportunities with the more data that's made open and accessible to people like yourselves, what value are you going to create based on this open data? Where do you see your niche?
Yeah, so the idea, and what we can get a little bit further into what Tyche Insights will purport to do. Our goal is that we're strong believers that open data made available to citizens anywhere in the world to be able to analyze it, storytell from it, create maps, create graphs, create images, whatever, and then publish that data and make it available. That's a good thing. Any kind of public information that gets contextualized helps to inform citizens and helps with transparency, et cetera. But beyond that, there are 2 or 3 things that we hope for. One is we believe that citizen-led data storytelling creates an environment where people with different points of view can talk about issues in a civil manner. I think we can all agree. We can't agree with on a lot of things pervasively, around the world, but I think we can agree that sort of civility and a lack of respect for people's opinions is pretty darn common. And we believe that an environment where, sort of unbiased data storytelling using public data can help contribute to more civil conversation. That's one thing. The second is we definitely believe that, I think in the United States, local government is roughly $1.5 to $2 trillion of spending. And we believe that the availability of information that helps inform policy and helps inform spending, helps inform contractual relationships, helps inform how government, does budgets and taxes and property development, et cetera, that those things are good and that they will help to make government more efficient, decrease spending, and make our communities more resilient as well. So we really think that there are just all these benefits that come with more public data becoming open and available for geospatial and non-geospatial people to come along and storytell with that data.
So, I agree. It sounds like a great idea, but you said something extremely important, at least in my mind, during that, and it was unbiased. How do we make sure stories like the ones that you want to tell, or create the opportunity for people to tell, are unbiased? Because otherwise, we could end up in a situation where we're weaponizing the data against each other.
Yeah, I think that being able to tell unbiased stories is something that you really need to see examples of. You need to get a style guide. So, think about something like Wikipedia. Wikipedia has a style guide that covers Wikipedia, and a huge chunk of that style guide is being able to coach people and teach people how to, write encyclopedia articles in an unbiased fashion. Here are words that you should steer away from. Here's ways that you want to make sure you're not interjecting your own personal point of view. Here's how to use resources and sources that are cited, etc. And similarly, we can use that same kind of style guide to explain to people who are doing public data storytelling how to tell more unbiased stories. And it's one of those things like, if we started doing some practice data storytelling for the city where I live. I'm in Albany, New York, a couple hours north of New York City. And just as an experiment, we started doing data storytelling just to get the sense of what was it like. And my co-founder is a guy named Keith who lives out in Illinois. And I remember early on, we were doing some of this practice storytelling, and I was writing stories, and Keith would point out very, very to the point, like, that's an overloaded word, or that phrase suggests a point of view or bias. And it was hard. Your reaction is, no, this is so well written. And you look at it, you're like, yeah, crap. I'm really interjecting sort of this personal bias in. So there's a little bit that's, you can give people a style guide, you can go through some editorial control, and you can show examples of what unbiased storytelling is as well.
I think that editorial control is going to be very important. Reviewing, having other people look at it and sort of help push you in the right direction, or challenge you on some of your assumptions.
Absolutely. And I think that, once you kind of get it, it's one of those things it's hard until it isn't. After you go through a few growing pains to understand the whole concept of unbiased, then it's like, something just clicks and you say, okay, now I know how to recognize it. I know how to avoid it. It still is work and still something that you want to pay attention to. But that's as we develop a community, these are the kinds of things we want to sort of engender in our community.
Do you imagine the style guide including things like tools? Do this with that tool. This is a tool for that kind of thing. Or will this be built into whatever platform you're perhaps creating?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that we're building within Tyche to support data storytellers. We want to give people guidance. If storytelling, back up a little bit here. Think of public data storytelling. Is a whole bunch of things. It's teaching people how to acquire open data or how to unlock public data that's tightly held, and then it's how do you formulate questions that you want to answer? And then it's how do you analyze the data? And then how do you create data visualizations? And how do you write a story? How do you edit it? How do you publish it, etc.? And so we will be giving people help along the way. We also like the idea of showing people examples. Even for the city of Albany, we have 24 stories that touch on everything from how much solar is being built in the city of Albany to what does our property tax base look like? And then we're writing stories on crime and how should we optimize our traffic calming measures with the limited budget that we have. So we want people to look at stories that exist already and say, wow, I really like that story. I just want to plug in my local city's data and contextualize it with sort of the meaning from my own city. And then there are other things, we also like to think that we can teach people very simple geospatial things like, hey, we can coach people how to create a heat map using crime data to see where crime is happening using QGIS. We can write that up so someone can, learn a tool, perform their own analysis, etc. So there are definitely a mix of things that we'll be bringing to the table to support people in that end-to-end data storytelling.
Who do you think and forgive me, I'll use a marketing term here, your target audience will be? Will it be the people that are listening to this podcast, geospatial professionals? Will they be journalists? Will they be concerned citizens? Like, what's your gut feeling there?
Yeah, almost certainly all of the above. And let me kind of break the answer down into two pieces. One is, let me talk about the geospatial professionals who are part of this audience. I'd start with a personal anecdote. I've lived in the city of Albany, New York for 30 years. The house I'm living in, I've lived for 30 years. I've had a great career in data and analytics. And over 30 years, I spent zero time looking at my own city's data until about a year ago. And I started playing around with some data, and I found it fascinating. I learned, even as a geospatial professional, I'm analyzing my city's crime data, which is fairly geospatial. I'm analyzing my city's property and tax data. That's pretty geospatial. And then I was trying to look at budgets, which really, in a lot of ways, maybe they don't seem geospatial, but budget in the end has a lot of geospatial components. So for the geospatial professionals out there, to me, there are kind of three things going on. One is, the things that a geospatial professional does in their day job, they can almost lift up those skill sets and drop them into analyzing their own city or community's data. Hey, if you're doing remote sensing as a part of your day job, you may be able to use remote sensing to analyze suburban and exurban development in your greater metropolitan area. The second thing is, I think when geospatial professionals start to look at maybe things that are not fully geospatial, but kind of geospatial adjacent, like all those exciting skills about sifting through data and transforming it and getting value from it, all of those things apply. I got really excited analyzing my first budget. I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't done budgeting in a long time, and it has nothing to do with geospatial, but it was impactful, and being able to share things with people was very rewarding to me. And I think lastly, for me, you look at geospatial professionals, I'm painting with a pretty broad brush here, but I think it's true. Geospatial professionals are really good systems thinkers. We are trained to think kind of cause and effect and linkages between different things. So a geospatial professional might be really well positioned to think about the intersection of demographics and property development and crime and business growth, and to be able to connect the dots because a geospatial professional is kind of trained to think about those kinds of cause and effect relationships. So let me stop there. Does that make sense, or bring up any questions on the geospatial professional side?
It makes a lot of sense, and it does bring up a few questions as well. In my career, so I've had almost nothing to do with storytelling, although I've been involved with geospatial for quite some time. It's always been in the close to the machine room, fix this, transform that, put that over there, plug that in, update this kind of thing. And it sounds like you're building a community. If I was going to be part of this community, I would come with that set of skills, but absolutely no clue about how to tell an unbiased story. And I think for someone like me, it'd be really helpful to have a template that I could follow, like you were saying. I'd like to tell the same story about my city, the thing I'm interested in, and be able to take a template and just put in data and step by step kind of thing, follow along. That would be amazing. And I also think it would be fantastic to be around other people that were moving in the same direction. People that were interested in the same thing. I think that would be incredibly helpful as well. And also having a place to publish it. Are any of those things on your drawing board?
Yeah, so absolutely, and really all of them. I think back, it's funny how ideas grow in your mind and change in your mind. When we're contemplating this idea, me and my co-founder Keith, 6, 7, 8 months ago, we had this very linear and solo view of what data storytelling was. Hey, we're going to help Daniel in his community tell a story end to end, and that'll be great when we enable Daniel to do this. And what we've realized is that data storytelling is even more interesting and more fun. And yes, I will use the word fun in sort of that rewarding way when data storytelling is a team sport. In the city of Albany, we've pulled in a couple of other people as we've done some sample data storytelling. One of the guys who's helping us out is an expert in nuclear data, and he loves data, and he's applying that same skill set to the city's data. We have a few other people helping out as well. And so when you have that as a team sport, it's not all on you. If we don't have to, convince you that, hey, you'll do well at 3 of these things, but these other 2 things you've never done before, you'll kind of suffer through. All of a sudden it becomes, hey, how can we help you? And by extension, we're thinking of how to do kind of group projects where everyone's doing the same thing all at once for their community. Hey, let's have a project where everyone's going to be looking at crime data and kind of following a rough template, and we'll all be here to support each other as we're using tools, as we're storytelling, and we can even compare and contrast results, etc. So it kind of breaks out of that dude sitting in his mom's basement, data storytelling, and what's kind of going up with that to, let's bring that out into the open and treat it as like this team sport that's really catalyzed by a community.
I think that side of it sounds really, really interesting. It would be nice to have some accountability. I think if I was going to do something like this, it'd be nice to have someone saying, hey, come on, stay on track, keep doing this thing. I did this, I fell over here, this worked for me. Kind of, I'd find that incredibly helpful. I also think it feels to me like there would be an appetite for this kind of thing. More and more on social media, we're seeing open source intelligence being quoted and referred to by, I hate to say legacy media, but I think you understand where I'm going. And so I'm sure there's an appetite for this kind of thing. And I think it would be nice if someone did come along and put some sort of guardrails around it and help people out.
Yeah, and maybe this gets back to a question of yours that we didn't answer, which is who's actually going to read or use this? We talked a little bit about geospatial professionals being a part of the community, but we kind of think of both readers and users. Hey, if someone, I think about the way I go to Wikipedia. I might look up one thing, and then all of a sudden I'm lost. I'm lost in a good way. I've looked through 20 different articles, and I went from New Zealand rugby players to, I don't know, whoever wrote Canterbury Tales or whatever. I'm sure there's some sort of connective tissue between those two things. But we want that same kind of thing where someone can say, hey, you know what? I'm just a reader. I want to read about my community, and I'm going to ingest in every single story that's been written about my community because I just want to be smarter. Or someone might want to look at a topic. They might want to look at data stories related to, how to catalyze property development, or how to do infill housing, or how people have studied the benefits of traffic calming measures, or something like that. And either of those are great from a reader point of view. But then we also have this concept of users, and a user could be a journalist, an academic, a not-for-profit organization. And one thing we kind of glossed over, didn't touch on, is with Tyche Insights, if you write a story, you contribute that story to the community, and it's available via a Creative Commons license. Anyone can use that data for free. Anyone can use your contextualization, your data story for free. So we like that idea that a journalist who may not have that time or talent to kind of analyze data and tell a story, they might see something that they like, they read, and they're like, oh my gosh, someone has really come up with some, a story here that could be, whether it's an expose or just something that helps inform their newspaper or TV readers. Great, grab that and plug it in. So we like this idea, the types of users who could use the data: journalists, academics, nonprofits, corporations, politicians, policy developers. it's really fairly limitless in terms of who can actually use the data.
I can see this as being a really great way of somebody getting their name out there as well. If your name was attached to a story that then a journalist came along and look, Tyche Insights has published this here. That's the stamp of confidence that I needed in order to refer to it. Great. And then maybe that person gets a leg up. Maybe they get to do more stories. Maybe they get their name out there a little bit more. Because I think a lot of people that love making maps would like to do it for a living. Like if their job could be, can you make beautiful maps all the time? I think they would be into that.
I'll tell you, Daniel, having spent a decent amount of time over the last 8 to 10 months doing data storytelling for the city of Albany, New York, and New York State, and there are some other things that I've been doing data storytelling on related to harm reduction in the United States, opioid interdiction, and things like that. If you gave me a job doing data storytelling all day long, I'm in. I mean, and now I may be a bit of an aberration or an exception, but we really do think that there are people that just love this idea of being able to take data, turn it into some kind of value that helps inform the public discussion, helps hold their government accountable, helps people imagine what could be or what should be. If those end up being people that are exercising and developing their personal brand for data storytelling, awesome. That's fantastic.
So we're kind of agreeing with each other. This is a great idea, patting each other on the back. There's high fives all the way around. What challenges do you see with this? Or have you faced already, perhaps?
As we're developing the Tyche Insights concept, we looked at the city of Albany and we said, hey, let's write about 24 data stories for the city of Albany. And that really gave us some ideas of some of the challenges, like we talked about bias. I think obviously you can't get through any technology discussion without thinking about AI these days. And so we need to think about, do we try to put guardrails on AI? We don't want people to just be making a public information request, unlocking some public data, and then just throwing AI at it and saying, hey, write me a story based on this data. We kind of miss the point. And really the AI, I mean, our civic AI engagement, it just isn't good these days, no matter what the AI is. So trying to figure out the place for AI, that's a big one. Figuring out kind of the practicalities of developing a community. We are heavily modeling this community that we'll develop off of Wikipedia and how Wikipedia developed. And also, it's funny you mentioned open source Intel, that community, the open source community. At the same time, this is just different enough that we're going to have to figure out things along the way. So that's one of our other challenges is we like that idea of the bottom-up development of the community. So we're deliberately not figuring out certain things ahead of time. We're not figuring out, how should a data storyteller cite sources? How should a data storyteller refer to how much AI they've used in the process? And so these are some of the things we'll kind of lay out a number of things that we want to figure out, and we'll work hand in hand with the community to figure that out rather than be prescriptive. So those are some of the challenges that we can imagine that are a piece of developing Tyche.
I'm glad you brought up AI because I think that's going to be a really big deal. And I think it'll be very important for your brand of Tyche as well to get a handle on that kind of stuff and be able to, when you publish something, that guarantee, yes, this is good. Someone has looked at this. This is peer reviewed. I think that's going to be super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And we like that idea. The analogy we use is water. All of the data stories are available for free for anyone in perpetuity. And at the same time, we do want to run a business on top of this. So there's an aspect of this which is kind of like, hey, you can get the water for free from drinking from a fountain, but we'll also find ways to sort of put the water in a bottle, charge a little bit more. Maybe you get additional metadata, APIs, whatever that sit on top of the data. And we also can imagine that companies will come along, AI companies especially, they'll come along and say, hey, here's a great data set in its totality that we can use and ingest into various AIs. And that's great. We currently, if you want to engage in any sort of like civic engagement discussion with any AI, they're pretty poor. I mean, if you asked a question like, tell me 10 other towns in New Zealand that are like mine that are struggling with, pick some topic, budget, housing development, whatever, the AI would fail, in terms of giving you like good, actionable information that you could trust to develop policy on top. So we do believe that, hey, if we create this corpus of content that's data plus contextualization that talks about both the good and the bad of how cities and local governments work, that all gets fed into AI systems and really can provide much better answers or much more meaningful answers if you're trying to draw sort of civic engagement guidance out of them.
That is really interesting. I was thinking about our conversation earlier about unbiased data, unbiased storytelling, how obviously it would affect, we talked about Albany as an example, it's going to affect that area. You've shown up with these unbiased stories about this area. But we're also talking about like this can be unbiased on a global scale as well, through feeding it into AI and maybe try and just sort of push the data set more towards the unbiased side of the spectrum.
Yeah, and hey, a lot of this is very speculative. We have to sit here and kind of imagine, okay, if we have this corpus of information, I mean, we like this idea that we could be sitting here 2 or 3 years from now where we have tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe even more data sets that one or more stories have been built on top of. And that could be anywhere in the world. Maybe we start in the US, but it could be anywhere. And then we kind of speculate, okay, what does that mean when an AI system ingests all that data and how is it most useful? That will not be part of our role to put the data into an AI system. But we sure as heck will be paying attention downstream, looking downstream at the downstream consumption and sort of the results and figuring out like, hey, are the AI companies being great stewards of our data? Did we miss something that's causing, bad effects or bad impacts, or are there certain things that we should be doing more of that will prove a better downstream effect? So a lot of speculation. I suppose that's pretty common across the whole AI and data industries right now.
Yeah, and thank you for making that clear for everyone that it is speculation, and these are just thoughts that you're sharing with us today. I appreciate that. I was wondering about this idea of reproducible research. Will that be something that you'll be wanting to push? So it's one thing to have a data story, I think. So when I've clicked on your website, albanyDataStories.com, and checked it out, and it didn't look like it was reproducible to me. I just had a quick look.
Yeah, great question. And there are certain things that, so we've published for the city of Albany. We have this albanyDataStories.com website where we've published articles. And there are a few things that we don't do there that we will do when we, are really supporting data storytelling as a part of the community, the Tyche community. So, and one of those things is really sharing more about the methods, sharing more about the process that people use, sharing more about any caveats, any shortcomings. And just as an example of a shortcoming, if someone is using public data and their data storytelling and they notice that, hey, this data is a little thin here, it looks a little biased here, it's a little old there. We want our data storytellers to be able to express like, hey, here are some of the shortcomings. But we also want them to describe the process, maybe even the tools as well. Hey, if someone has developed like some Python code that, does all sort of the ELTs or transformations or whatever it takes to get value, we want people to share that because A, it helps with that transparency, to your point, Daniel. And B, what better way to spread all these methods than to say, hey, here's the story. Here's the recipe I used. Here's the kitchen utensils I used. Grab the recipe and the kitchen utensils and get the same data for your own city and try this out. And kind of that replicability across cities also provides certain validation as well for our user community.
Are you focusing on any particular geographic area first when you think about building the community and telling these stories? Or do you have a global focus?
Yeah, so I think there's nothing that prevents this from being global in nature. We are starting in the United States just for kind of practical purposes, I suppose. But really, there's nothing that prevents this from going elsewhere. There are a few things that we need to figure out. One of them is the legal side of things. Just the access and use of public data is going to be different in different countries. In a lot of first world countries, not much different than the United States, but in other countries, there will be other guardrails that don't exist. The second is really making sure that we can support people. There are countries we can imagine where someone going and telling a data story and telling, a little bit of truth to power could have consequences that aren't going to be there in New Zealand or the United States. So how do we kind of put in those guardrails to allow people to be anonymous or to give people protection? And then thirdly, some of the things that an organization like Wikipedia faces. How do you make sure you get out of this English first world mindset and make sure that you're supporting Spanish and Tagalog and, pick one of 100 different languages that someone might want to use for their data storytelling. So, I like that, not to punt on a lot of these things, but I like that to me is where the community helps figure things out. If a mapscaping listener says, hey, I'm in Guatemala and I want to tell a data story about the intersection of property, businesses, and environmental damage, like, hey, let's talk. Let's figure out how to support anyone anywhere.
Speaking of that, like, is there somewhere people can go? Let's say someone's listening to this. Great, I'd like to be involved. I'd like to learn, be part of almost like the founding members of this community. Can they go somewhere today?
Yeah, at the point where this podcast is live, there will be two main resources. There will be www.tycheinsights.com, and then there will be wiki.tycheinsights.com. So the wiki is, it's kind of a standard wiki that's used for all of the storytelling and publishing, as well as all of the supportive activities as well. And on both www.tycheinsights.com and wiki.tycheinsights, there's a link that hey, if you want to talk to any of us, we recognize this is new, recognize that people will need to take a little bit of a leap of faith, or they may want to talk through some of their ideas. You can block I think it's a Calendly link. You can find 15 or 30 minutes to talk to us. And that's what we want to do. Hey, we want to engage, we want to talk to people, help them brainstorm, help answer their questions, make sure they understand some of the opportunities for them as well.
Yeah, thanks. I'll definitely put links to that in the show notes of this episode so people can find that. I was just sitting here thinking, like, wow, you're going to build this community of, I don't want to say qualified or trained data storytellers. If I was a big company and I had a lot of data and I wanted to get it out there in the world, like I think a lot of companies are really great at saying, oh, you can do this with our stuff. This is possible. And they are terrible at actually showing people what is possible. And if I was in that situation where I had a lot of data and wasn't very good at telling stories myself with it, I would want to engage with someone like you and say, hey, look, it looks like you have a community of storytellers. Can you help me out? Can we do something together?
Absolutely. That is definitely an angle that is highly possible that will come about. I'll put it this way. As we've been looking at various topics to analyze different data sets that range from healthcare to education to property to budget to taxes to, where is solar being built on the rooftops and whatever. Like, this is exciting for me, and on a personal level, I learn so much just about these data sets and what people want to do with them, the questions they want to answer, the tools that they want to use. And to me, that excitement that I have, I think of the mapscaping community and, the kinds of things that resonate in the geospatial community. Those are all things that geospatial professionals love as well. They love data and exploring new tools and, solving exciting problems in new ways, or solving new problems in exciting new ways, and existing problems in exciting new ways as well. So, this idea of more and more kind of recipes for analysis and how to do things, that will develop and will support people around the world.
Wonderful. I've got one final question for you, just to round things off. And I have a feeling I know how you're going to answer, but I'd love to hear you sort of summarize for us. What does success look like for you with this new venture?
Yeah, so I'd step back a bit. One thing we didn't talk about was one of our inspirations is the organization USA Facts. For those who aren't aware of USA Facts, it's usafacts.org. It's an organization, originally a nonprofit organization developed by Steve Ballmer, the former CEO of Microsoft. And it's really an organization that takes public data at the national level in the United States and does storytelling. Widely recognized for its unbiased, fact-heavy content. Great organization. And to me, success is taking that model of unbiased data storytelling using public data and making it available globally and at local levels, like unlocking data, helping with transparency, helping with accountability of government, having data-driven conversations. All of those things are excellent. But I think there's also this corollary, and from a personal level, I lived it, which is 9 months ago, I really didn't know much about this city that I've lived in for 30 years about, certain aspects. And now I'm not an expert, but I know a heck of a lot more. And I feel like I can engage in conversations. I can teach people. I can explain things. I can learn things from other people about my city and how it works. So, we hope that there's just this raise all boats kind of value that comes from public data storytelling, unlocking data, and making it available to people.
Well, I said before, I think I know what you're going to say, and I think I got maybe 50% of it right. usafacts.org, I've got it up on my screen at the moment. That is a brilliant example. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. That gives people, at least it gives me, a really good idea of what this could turn into. So thanks very much for that. I'll put those links that you mentioned before in the show notes of this episode so people can sign up and join. And I am going to be following along, Karl, because this sounds awesome. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on again.
Thank you very much, Daniel. As always,